Welcome back to The Line. UNM recently named the finalists in the search for a new university president. People noticed immediately that none of the finalists are from New Mexico. We're going to get into that. And some UNM staff tried to convince the Regents to delay the search for a permanent president and keep interim President Chauke Abdallah for another year. Daniel, that did not work either. But we have these 5 finalists. A couple are in town this week addressing a couple of groups. I want to get from everybody right off the top your initial blush thought when you first saw the finalists, who they were, their backgrounds, and your initial sense of the fit here for UNM and New Mexico. Were you impressed? Were you not impressed, Daniel? Did anybody jump out at you? What was your thought?
Yeah, I wasn't impressed.
Okay.
I wasn't impressed for a university the size of New Mexico, kind of the flagship university of the state of New Mexico. I wasn't impressed with the finalists.
Okay.
I was kind of surprised that there was nobody from within the state or with ties to the state that made that finalist list.
Purposeful in your view, or it's so stark? Is there something there, do you think?
You know, I've said this a long time. One of the problems in this state with the people in New Mexico, I think, is we have a real identity complex problem. We always kind of believe people from out of state can do it better than we can do it. We seem to, we're always chasing the business from out of state. We're always trying to bring people in from out of state. And we seem to forget that we should look within and see what's going on. I was really surprised that there was nobody from within the state. I think there were quite a few qualified people that could have assumed this position. To the part about I'm sure that I'll draw opposition on this, but from the part of the staff, the university, faculty asking the Board of Regents, to me that's just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. The Board of Regents has a job to do. One of those jobs is hire the president of the university, and they're going to do it. I think it's clear that we haven't seen the dysfunction at any Board of Regents that we've seen at UNM in the last few years with this group of folks running the board. It seems to be, when you start hearing...
a Robert's Rule problem over there.
Well, I'm hearing that they're
right.
ippering each other to get each other's emails. You can't even get into a meeting and have a conversation. And I think that stems from, organizations tend to manifest the personality of the person that's in charge, the leader. So I think you got to look at the president of the Board of Regents and look at his inability to coalesce a group to come together and have these conversations. And I think it leads everybody to question what they're doing, their process, or lack thereof.
That's right. Mary, we've got 2 with doctorates, 3 with PhDs.
Right.
We've got, these are no slouches, but one of the things that does stand out to me is the background being in the medical school industry.
Right.
So I had to use that word industry, not to make people in the medical field cringe. Anything there? Is there something UNM, the search committee, is telling us by having these similar backgrounds on this kind of thing?
That's what I noticed, was that we had 2 doctors, and then we had 2 in sciences, then we have a psychologist. But the doctors is what I kind of like to see, because I think that there is possibly a power struggle. There's definitely a finance struggle between the UNM and the hospitals, and so maybe bringing in a medical doctor can help bridge that gap a little bit. So I liked that idea.
Is money speaking louder than academics here? We're talking about a big institution, that medical school.
Yeah, it could be, because the medical school's like, wait a second.
Right.
And because it was last year where UNM said we're going to be using the medical school budget, and medical school said not so fast. And so now we're having some doctors come in. So maybe that was a great olive branch for the Board of Regents to maybe we can bring in if we bring in a medical doctor with that kind of training, that will help our medical school, that'll help bridge that gap.
Interesting point there. Giovanna, what do you think? Is something being given up to gain something, as Mary, this medical side of things?
I think that it's interesting to look at the academics versus the medical field. I'm a little nervous about it going over too much to the medical side, and what about the academics? What about really investing in in the main part of our university? That's the flagship university of the state. We have so many professors who are adjuncts who are not full-time, they're not getting benefits. Where's the investment in our academics, first of all? But the other thing is, just looking at the long view of this, over the last 20 years, we've had about 7 different presidents-ish. I just looked at it briefly. And so, a couple have been there for 7 or 8 years. That's good. A few have been there for 1 year, maybe 3, 4 years. So I think that there's a lot of turnover. And the stability issue is a big one.
Well,
right
that's
now.
what the faculty
Right.
wanted the board to address, and the UNM is now going into an accreditation year.
Right.
That's what they wanted. They
So I
said,
can
"Look,
understand. I
stability."
can understand
Right.
them wanting the stability. However, we do need to trust the process. The regents are there to do a job. We've got to let them do the job. If we don't like the process, let's change the process. But let's let them do it. But on the candidates, I would like to say, out of the 5, we do have 2 women, which is great.
That was good.
We've never had a woman president of UNM. I would like to see a woman.
Right.
We've also we also had only one of the 5 is a person of color. I think the
Right.
one woman is a person of color.
From UTEP, right?
So I think there's a question of, do these candidates represent the face of New Mexico? I mean, none of them are from New Mexico. We know that, but you know, I think that's a question. But
Those are
I am
good
happy to
questions,
see
yeah.
women being in the running.
Let me put another woman on the table, Sophie. I'm surprised, and I'm hearing this a lot on the street, so to speak, Barb Dameron.
True.
That Barb Dameron was not one of the finalists, and I have to wonder if, to Dan's point a little bit, are the regents avoiding an internal scrum, meaning either inside New Mexico or inside campus, to keep this thing not as politicized, or make it less politicized by having somebody who's not of New Mexico, not of the political wars, not of, you know what I mean, doesn't have a
Hasn't worked
natural
for a particular
constituency.
administration or something like
Exactly,
that.
and have somebody come in clean with none of that, and does Ms. Dameron get robbed sort of in the meantime? You know what I mean? This is what I hear. I mean, you know.
Nobody's entitled to a particular job.
Sure.
It's, you know, you don't. This isn't a monarchy. You're not born to it. But is it possible that that's an approach of the committee? It is possible. I would like to think that the regents instead are saying who's the best out there, regardless of whether they come from within New Mexico or not.
Okay.
I would like to pick up something that Giovanna said, that, and she sort of started to move toward that I think that that UNM really does need to address. A new president is not an entirely new school. They're going to be inheriting what's already in place. They're going to have top administrators who have been there for a very long time and who are very entrenched. And so when we say, oh, we're going to hire somebody and we hope for turnaround, we hope for big change, we hope for, I don't think we can hope too hard and expect our expectations to be met. These are complicated institutions. UNM has shown, as I think you were, there's been a fair amount of turnover. Now, turnover at high-level university positions it tends to be high anyway. We're looking 3 years, 5 years,
That's a good
things
point.
like that. But
Yep.
but we've seen a sequence of, a series of presidents come in with high hopes who have not been able to make the kind of change that we would like to see them make. To Dan's point, do we have a functional Board of Regents? Do we have a functional top administration? Do we have functional all the way down? It's going to be very hard for one person to take all of that on.
It's that ecosystem,
Impossible.
Right.
Mary. Yeah,
Right.
exactly
Yeah.
right. They're walking into something. But I have to say again, I'm going to bring it up again. This position cannot be anything but political because it's made political.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And I don't see in a lot of these backgrounds here a natural, sort of a political background. You don't have to have a political background, but it's just something you'd have to deal with. I'm sure they did it at their
Right.
individual schools. Don't get me
Exactly.
wrong. I'm sure they
Right.
fought the wars wherever
Yeah.
they're coming from.
Yeah.
But you see what I mean? Bob Frank came in, nicest guy in the world, got politicized fairly quickly.
Right.
And all those past presidents,
Yeah.
it happens to everyone here.
It sure
so,
does. It
yeah.
sure does. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Sure.
What one of the candidate from Idaho, what he did with their football team, just to kind of pull it out of the football
Right.
conference or something. Didn't get rid of football. I thought that was interesting, and
is
I'm wondering,
interesting.
I wonder if that's going to.
There's been a call for that,
Or
right,
help. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
I think I think also the conversation about the health science side. I think there's also people need to realize and it was a surprising fact when I was in the legislature that yes, the Health Science Center brings in a lot of money for grants and stuff. The Health Science Center also costs a lot of money. They are in constant litigation with constant settlements that have cost risk services, have affected the University of New Mexico at an unbelievable level. I mean, these are millions and tens of millions of dollars worth of settlements.
High stakes,
And
yep.
so, there's been this, you know, and that, by the way, that all kind of occurred when there was really one big umbrella over everything. The last few years, they've really tried to divide that. They've really tried to say, look, we're going to have the health science side with the chancellor. We're going to have the guy in charge and Dr. Roth, who's here. And if you look at, remember, we had that whole big fight about he's kind of on the same line with the president of the university now. He's kind of got his own board. He's kind of doing his own thing. And so it seems to me like it looks like the Regents is trying to bring that back to the university and say we're going to put someone in charge that's going to grab that and pull that back in. And I'm not sure that's the right move they should be making.
We're gonna have to hold there. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Giovanna. We're just a little bit of time. We'll come back to this issue, though. Believe me, this is long from over. And